How's it going, gang?
Well, I guess we're up. No intro. All right. We don't need an intro because we're coming to you live from the Back the A studios. I am Mike Luke, joined by John Schuster, William Brad Alice, as always brought to you by DraftKings, America's #1 sportsbook app. Got a lot to get to already, a ton of questions or comments coming in here. But all right, we got to talk about, first of all, Arizona basketball. This looked like one of those games you're going to play ugly against a bad team and you end up winning by 14. And we're sitting here talking about how they didn't look very good. They bucked that trend. They ended up winning by 30 plus, John Schuster.
It certainly drifted that way in the first 12 minutes of the game, and to Corpus Christi's
Crispy.
Wow, that sounds like a good donut chain. To the Islanders' credit, they were they're a pesky team. I think they've got some pretty good athleticism and some talent. They're going to be a problem in their conference. There's a decent chance they're going to get into the league. I think their coach at some point in the fairly near future is going to get a pretty good job. I think they do a lot of things well. But after Arizona realized the quickness that it was up against, and, in fairness, was a little bit flat-footed as they get off of a big game that took place Saturday and prepare for another big game that's coming up Saturday, this one in between. Once they kind of leveled things off a little bit, it was clear where this thing was going to go. And ultimately, I think arguably the last 30 minutes or so of this matchup, Arizona was clearly in control, was going to pull away, and got really good bench play beyond that. I think Arizona's bench scored 49 of their 99 points in a 99-61 win, which I think was also a good idea from Tommy Lloyd's perspective to give his starters a lot of rest, knowing that there's going to be some serious, some legitimately highly ranked competition coming into McKale over the weekend.
William?
Yeah, it was one of those games, again, the slow start, but then they almost doubled the Corpus Christi in the second half. I mean, I think they outscored them, 52-27. And I think we all love when you get out to one of those early 30-7 runs and the game's over by halftime. But more often than not, even against mediocre competition, and this is a team that, if they get in the NCAA tournament, will be lucky to get a 15. What were they in the play-in game last year or the year before? But that happens. It's a feeling out process. Obviously, they came out, they played a little sloppy. I think Corpus Christi played pretty well, knocked down some shots, and did just enough to make Arizona uncomfortable for 8 or 9 minutes. And then it was all Arizona from there. So there's not a whole lot you can learn from it. I think more than anything, it's one of those games that you schedule because they're going to be a competent team that can bring a different look to the table. And how dare you slander Kirk Walters with Alex Jacobson slander?
We're going to get to Dylan Anderson in a second because he's been beat up a lot right here. But first, had a lot of people here that want to talk about the Four Peaks. Naturally, this, joking aside, this is going to be the strength of this team, and we've talked about it a bunch. Four Peaks, dubbed by John Schuster. I cannot take credit for this. I stole it from him and ran with it, but it's John Schuster that to blame or give credit for, as the Swedish pinball, which we will get to later on in the show. But guys, and I know, Schuster, you're not really into this kind of stuff. Brad, you are a little bit more, but I'm just going to say it right now. If this center, power forward, big man, quartet, troika, duo, whatever you want to put it, this is as good as we've ever seen here. Am I wrong? Am I right? Am I just being excited and being stupid? What do you say?
It might be the greatest collection to see the court at the same time. I would be hard-pressed to say this group is better talent-wise than Tolbert, Cook, Rooks, even though Rooks never played with Tolbert. But yeah, it's if you're going deep, Rooks, Williams, and for as maligned as he is, Ed Stokes is a really nice third big man. He just problem is when he became a starter, he was still the third big man. So yeah, Wayne Womack in that group. So it's up there. They may not have the NBA accolades some of those other groups but from sure size, this is a better version of the Tucson Skyline, which never quite developed.
Shu, what do you think about that?
Like you said, I'm not really into the comparison thing all that much, but hopefully if you're doing a PHNX Wildcat broadcast 10 years from now, and there's another big line that comes in, you can compare them to this line, which is a good thing. The strength of Arizona's basketball team is obviously on the inside. There are other than the talent and depth that they have at that position or at those positions. They also, in some key games somewhere along the line, also potentially have 20 fouls, which a lot of teams on the inside do not. And that's going to be the type of thing in physical matchups that may be necessary. But there's a lot of conversation, I think, about who's a better player. Is it Tubelis? Is it Ballo? To me, it's both of them. They complement each other.
They complement each other perfectly.
If they're on the floor at the same time for most of the game, that makes things difficult for the opposition. Visar has played really well the last couple games and appears to be moving in a positive direction. And Anderson was good tonight. Again, obviously against lesser competition, but that I think is a good sign. And a lot of coaches that have passed through this program, and I think Tommy Lloyd says much the same thing, and a lot of coaches in a lot of other locations do as well, is that when you're able to practice against better competition, which is what depth provides, your depth is going to get better along the way. And I think Arizona's number 3 inside player and number 4 inside player get to benefit facing a good 1 and a good 2, whether that's 1A or 1B, depending on, whether you like Tubelis or Ballo more, on a daily basis. And it helps them become valuable commodities as this season moves along.
All right, we've had a lot of people ask about Kerr Kriisa, and I can't confirm this, but I've talked to a few people, and it sounds like he just had he had an upset stomach, maybe a little too much Taco Bell, a little maybe few too many Del Taco cheeseburgers.
There's also something going around Tucson. And hopefully, and if that's the case, it may be short-lived. The concern, obviously, is if other players catch it 3 days from now, and then it maybe is, something that slows a lot of other folks down. But it sounds like it isn't particularly serious, and generally speaking, long-term, the Cats should be fine. I
want to get your guys' take on the bench here, because some people are asking here about the bench, but a couple things first. OGs. All right, here's the thing. OGs is partnered now with PHNX, the number 1 gummy out there. You can go to any of your local dispensaries, again, be 21 and up to enjoy, and they've got your sativas, they've got your indicas, you name it, they got it, all kinds of different flavors, very good stuff, helps put you to sleep, helps you feel good, you name it, they got it. Check out the show notes and the link in the description. Got to be 21 and up to enjoy. Another thing you got to be thing to enjoy is the 4 Peaks. Now, again, many people think the 4 Peaks are just the U of A big men. They would be wrong. The original 4 Peaks is based out of Tempe. You can go down there. You can check out. They got a lot of watch parties. If you want to go down there and root against ASU, be my guest. But I would say this. The better thing that you can do is come to the Tap and Bottle watch parties where they have 4 Peaks brew as well. So again, 21 and up, enjoy responsibly. Check the show notes and the links for details. All of the description, we'll have that up there. All right, now, I want to ask you guys about the bench. Obviously, you guys did a great job on the post game. Very happy very happy that you guys were able to do that. In the game against Indiana, there was some good bench play. Adama Ball was a guy. Are we at the point now, if you've got Adama Ball, Said Henderson, and Henry Visar, is that a good enough eight-man rotation? Does that give you enough off the bench there, William?
You're forgetting Bosewell.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, I think it's a legit 9-man bench.
Okay.
Now, depending on matchups and how other guys, if Kerr is hot, maybe Boswell gets his 5 minutes instead of his 12 minutes. But I think legitimately you've got about 9 guys, and if you have to turn, to Anderson for his 5 fouls or whatever, or just to sub in, it's competent. And again, I think we talked about this in the off season, and it's lived up. It reminds me of those Lute teams that had very strong benches, whether it was scoring off the bench or role playing off the bench. And, how many of these guys, and I'll go all the way through Anderson, how many of these guys start even for, Pac-12 teams?
Right.
A couple of the, three of these guys could start for Oregon State could start for.
We can't make fun of ASU anymore. They're actually good.
No, they're playing well. But you know what? Would Arizona's second five, with maybe the exception of Askew, start for Cal?
Right.
And I know that was a close game here, but Cal's awful.
Cal's
so I think that's the key. And again, you don't necessarily need Henderson to come off the bench and score 12. You need him to play some defense some games. You're going to need him to grab rebounds some games. Some games you're going to need him to knock down the big shot. Same thing with Adama Ball. Bosewell has shown that he can run the offense for small stretches. Henry can pick up rebounds or fouls, or even tonight he pumped in 16. So it's a very versatile and talented bench. Now, if you have to go with all five of them for 20 some odd minutes a game, no. But to bring each guy off individually to spell other guys, it's a great asset to have, especially when Arizona wants to go up tempo and also at times has a propensity to foul a little bit.
You guys mentioned we had a couple commenters, and I actually had somebody tweet this at me Saturday, and I wanted to ask both of you guys, because you could definitely speak to this, about comparing and contrasting, because we talk all the time about how Lute was up and down, Tommy Lloyd is up and down. When you watch it, what just kind of comes to your mind? Do you see that's different? Maybe that's the same? Are there any reactions there? Because I've had a few people ask me that now, and I figured that I'd ask you too.
I'll let Brad chime in on this, because I think Brad talked about this a little bit Saturday, and I thought it was pretty cogent. There's a bit of a foundation, in essence. There's a little bit more of the coaching element between Arizona and Gonzaga and back to Arizona is like a little bit like Lombard Street in San Francisco. Kind of waves around a little bit, but sort of ultimately gets from beginning to end. Olson is sort of a foundational component in the running nature of college basketball. Obviously, he's not the only coach that ran a lot. Plenty of them did. But Olson ran with a certain style that, pressed a little bit in the half court on the defensive end, utilized that defense to score on the offensive end. And he also allowed, our pal Matt Muehlbach has talked about this quite a bit, a certain freedom in individual players. Now, Mark Few at Gonzaga has tweaked some of those approaches. I think they want to get up the court faster. They like to run on a more even consistent basis. If the running opportunity is there, they almost try to take it. But there's a lot of Arizona trying to run off defensive rebounds and trying to run off of steals out on the perimeter. The defensive rebounding part, I think, is a little bit different when you look at the Gonzaga / Tommy Lloyd model. Lloyd, I think, has sort of melded the two and has a team that it likes to move up and down the floor and is very quick to deal with. So it's not a new thing, but each coach who comes along kind of tweaks a wrinkle a little bit. And I think all three of them have clearly, based on their overall records, done phenomenal jobs giving their respective fan bases an up-tempo style that has also led to a lot of W's.
Yeah, to me, in many ways, I think what Lloyd does, which Lute did, with Few did, is they're up-tempo, but they're versatile. They're able to take what the other team gives them, I think, more than some of your, if you looked at Nolan Richardson, for example, you played his style regardless. It was, we're going to get up and down. We're going to press 40 minutes of hell. On his best teams, it was, my two guards are going to jack up long threes, or we're going to dump it down to Corliss. And I don't care if you've got a 7'2", 300-pounder or a 6'6" guy. Corliss is going to get his touches in the paint.
Right.
And then what was it? Stacey Dillard, the guy who could shoot from like 3 counties over, who was just impossible to guard. Patino, to a lesser extent, was kind of that way. I'm going to dictate pace. Certainly,
was it Scotty Thurman, not Stacey Dillard? Was that
there was
name?
Dillard and Thurman, both.
Okay.
I think they had both. But yeah, Dillard's the guy, or Thurman's the guy I'm thinking of, though. You're right. Whereas I think with even look tonight. Tonight they had the clear inside matchup. Okay, I mean they're still scoring 90 some odd points, but the three bigs. We're not even going to count. What was it? 50 some odd points between the three bigs. Maybe 60 when you count Anderson's. And not that Nolan didn't do that, but it's very much, there'll be games where they're not going to dump it down as much, because but it's that free flowing, and they can go full court. They can go off of turnover, but they can also get into the half court and still play up tempo half court and play pretty smart 9 times. I mean, obviously this team does turn over the ball a little bit, but so did Lute teams. Remember, Lute wanted like 14 turnovers or less, whereas what was Miller, 11?
Right.
But that was because Lute had 12 more possessions
per
game. But that's what it really reminds me of. It's just this versatility, this ability to score efficiently, whether you're running and gunning or just getting into the half court with that motion offense.
Right. No, I totally agree with that. One thing I am remiss in, and that's why we have people like William Brad Alice here. Kylan Bosewell had 8.7 rebounds and 8 assists in 26 minutes. That's, again, I get that you're playing Corpus Christi, but that's a heck of a stat line no matter who you're playing, especially for a guy that was struggling a little bit.
And he looked confident. I mentioned this on Twitter, I think in the post game over the weekend. I think Adama Ball looks really close to figuring it out. And I would include Boswell's there now as well, and it may not happen to the full extent of their abilities this year, but they're really close to clicking enough where they can be dangerous against even more talented teams. As Ball had some good minutes against Indiana. And I think the other thing, and I was thinking about this when they were talking, I was listening to the broadcast, and I think it was Kent or Muehlbach, not sure which, but they mentioned, Ballo could be the first guy to be most improved and be in contention for Pac-12 Player of the Year. And and you can look at this team and say, if Ballo and Tubelis leave next year, you realistically can think, can Boswell and Ball be stars on this team? And that's a Lute thing. Remember, Michael Dickerson barely played as a freshman. Miles
11
Simon,
points as a sophomore, 19 as a junior.
Exactly. Right. And that is something we didn't see under Miller because of how the game has evolved. You're one and dones. Markkanen leaves and you need a new star. Trier was the same guy day one as he was day 3. And maybe that's an indictment also of Miller. Solomon Hill was one of the few guys who got progressively better. But this team looks like they're built in that style. And again, Gonzaga does this and a few other schools do that. We're seeing, Carolina have more guys who last, who you can be a role player, a bit player in some cases, freshman year, really good, sophomore, and maybe a star. I mean, these guys evolve, and that's really good, I think, for fans, but hopefully it's really good for recruiting, where you bring in a guy and you let him know, again, people are making fun of Dylan Anderson over there. Why? He's what we were advertised.
Correct.
We wondered if he was going to redshirt. And again, in some ways, and he's not as good as he was as a freshman, but that's how Channing Frye was advertised. If you remember, I remember Shu and I in the old Cat Tracks offices. Are they going to redshirt this kid? Is he going to be? He was the 3rd best kid on his high school team because the Fontenot brothers didn't pass. But
right.
But that I find it refreshing, but I think it's also a very, valuable thing that you can do to continue to develop these kids. And whether that's a Tommy Lloyd thing, which I think it is, Ricardo Foy, Murph, Robinson, it's very interesting that, these people are all in the panic button right now about recruiting. Well, they got a top 15 kid. I mean, I know he's not ranked top 15, but I think we all know KJ Lewis is really good. But if your 3 stars next year are Ball, Lewis, and Boswell, and who knows what Big Henry's going to be like, and who knows what Dylan Anderson's going to be like. It may just be the thing, and this is what Luke did. You just keep rolling, and you don't have to worry about bringing in 4 new stars and trying to integrate them. You just kind of promote guys from within.
What's interesting about this entire situation is that you look at it. Oumar Ballo can come back, obviously. Ąžuolas Tubelis, Kerr Kriisa. And granted, I know we're in a different age of college basketball, but at the same time, these guys aren't great NBA prospects per se. You look on draft boards, you're not going to find them. And if you do find them, they're late 2nd round picks. I'm curious as to how the whole NIL thing works, because if you're one of these guys, let's say you're Oumar Ballo, for example, who, by the way, came around about 25 years too late, because if he was in the mid-90s, he'd be a first-round pick. But let's just say somebody comes to you and says, hey, here's $250,000 to come back for another year. That's pretty enticing stuff there, Shu. But just to kind of that point into Brad's point, what do you see from the bench right there and some of these other guys that we've, kind of talked about scattershot throughout the season?
It's so early in the NIL thing to get a real gauge on how that's
Fair.
ultimately going to break down. It's a perfectly legitimate point you made. It's also, we just don't know right now. So it's very possible a few more kids stay here and there. It's very possible that if there's, more money potentially to be made overseas or more money to be made in the NBA or another league, you do it. Who knows? We'll find out. One of the things I like about Arizona's UN approach, and I think this is going to be something to pay attention to with Gonzaga and Arizona, is they may suffer less from losing players by virtue of transferring. If you live in the States, generally speaking, and you're not playing the minutes that you'd like to play in a program, it's easier if you're in the States to jump to another school. If you live overseas, I think you're going and you're uncomfortable with the amount of minutes you're getting. I think it's more difficult to make that leap to go to another school. You're more likely to stick it out and see if it works a little bit. That kind of continuity, I think, is going to help teams that have a pipeline to more places than just the U.S. You have argued, Brad has argued, other people have rightfully argued that Arizona needs to recruit better in the States. That's absolutely true. But I think they're definitely going to benefit from that overseas pipeline as a result of that. And you're going to see a lot of this kind of beneficial transition for a program like Arizona. Arizona should be good regardless of their overall recruiting star standpoint. Right. I think for the foreseeable future. And so, until it starts to not be good, it's not something that I tend to get particularly worried about. There are a lot of players on this team who I think are going to stay on this team who are going to get better in this program. Another thing that I think is very helpful is that for whatever reason, and I think this is a bit of the style, and this is a bit of Lloyd's ability to be able to communicate the style. For whatever reason, he gets players to buy in to be unselfish, and the rest of it is relatively simple. While the sets look complicated and are difficult to stop, from pretty early on, the team understands what it is they're expected to do.
Right.
And they advance as a result a little bit quicker than other teams. As far as that's concerned, there are a lot of parallels to the early era of Lute Olson teams. There was a lot of talk in Olson's early tenure in Tucson from 88 until about 94 about how Arizona was more advanced than everybody else in November. And then they'd drop a game here or there in December, that infamous game before Christmas. And then as the season progressed into January and early February, other teams would start to get a little bit more cohesion and be able to catch up to where Arizona was. Arizona jumped out of the gates faster, and then other teams were able to catch up. And then what Arizona hoped to do is make the run from about mid-February and peak into March. This team and last year's team have a lot of that same feel about them. And so the question becomes, how much is Arizona going to continue to improve as this year moves along? And at what point are other teams going to ultimately catch up? I think the game over the weekend with Tennessee is obviously very interesting in that regard, but I'm certainly interested as well with some of the other conference opponents that Arizona has on the ledger.
We're going to get to just real quick.
Back on you after your read.
Yeah, for sure. And then we'll get to that. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the Tennessee game. But first of all, Tap and Bottle. All right. This is where you go for the official watch parties of PHNX Sports. Both of these men have been down there before. Come check it out. You got 4 Peaks on you got 4 Peaks there. You've got Mountain Mike's Pizza as well. Just saying. And it's a great place to go. Yell at the screen, be able to watch. You got a lot of people there watching, yelling at the screen, and just be awesome Wildcat fans. Again, Tap and Bottle downtown. Great setup, big screen TVs, and enjoying a few adult beverages. And the next one, Illegal Pete's. Who at the U of A, and I know there's an Illegal Pete's in Tempe. They got many of the same similar deals. Great food, tacos, cheese, you name it. They've got it. But Illegal Pete's in Tucson is better than the one in Phoenix, as is generally the case. You go to Illegal Pete's, John Schuster knows this from living in the area. Legal Pete's is probably a fairly prominent drop-off at points, maybe a pickup as well. And that's because it's awesome. People like Illegal Pete's. So again, check it out. Check show notes and the links in the description. But again, Illegal Pete's in Tempe or in Tucson. Great spots to go. Happy to have them as a sponsor.
University in Tyndall in Tucson.
University in Tyndall in Tucson. All right, real quick, and then we'll get to your point. I wanted to go by the numbers right here and see what's, okay. So you got, first of all, you look at it, 52 rebounds to 32. This was what should have happened because you look at Corpus Christi, they were starting a 6'4" power forward. The assist, the shooting, just across the board. It was a very efficient game there, Brad. What do you see when you look at those numbers?
I look at the fact that Arizona shot almost as well from behind the arc as they did inside the arc. If you shoot 55.6% and you don't win, something is very, very wrong. And, not only that, but when you shoot 30 points better from behind the arc than your opponent, unless you're just taking 2 shots, that's really hard to lose those basketball games.
Very well put, John Schuster. Do you see anything in there?
Yeah, I thought the defensive numbers were just as interesting as the offensive ones. In the first, let's say 10 to 12 minutes of this matchup, when things were still close, and Arizona wasn't quite accustomed, or, it took a little while to kind of get their bearings in place here, and Corpus Christi did a very nice job getting to loose balls and disrupting in the early stages. That gave them some opportunities in transition to score and keep things interesting. Oddly, once it got into a half-court game and Arizona solidified on the defensive end, their height pretty much took over, their depth took over, and that was pretty much all she wrote. And if you look at those defensive numbers, that's Arizona shines in that regard as well. Not only are you going to win a lot of games shooting 55 from three-point range, you're going to win a lot of games if you're holding your opponent to 30.7 from the field as well.
Right. William, what did you want to get to? It looked like a very good point.
Well, thanks. I'm glad it looked good. She was talking about the European players versus the American players. I think the one thing you have to look at is just how basketball is different on both continents. I mean, if you are worth your salt in Europe, you come up through a pro team's development system. Adama Ball playing for a French pro team's, amateur team. All these guys came up, and you basically have to wait your turn. You have to earn your spot. You have to go from, the real young team to the under 18 team to the main pro team. And that's kind of how the system works in at least a lot of Europe. I know Sweden's a little different just because there's not a lot of basketball players.
Right.
And there was, if you didn't read, an excellent article on The Athletic today about Pelle Larsson, the Swedish pinball, although they don't mention it in the article.
They're lost. It'll come around to them.
It'll come, yeah. But conversely here, and it's worse than ever, and I don't want to stereotype American basketball, but you got guys who announce their transfer from one high school to another, from one prep school to another. You don't like your playing time on one AAU team, you jump to another, or you get recruited to another AAU team. So I think the European system just kind of breeds patience, whereas the American system is very much, what can I do now? What can I get? And again, not everyone is like that. A lot of guys, and I think when you look at, and I'm going to pick on Dylan Anderson, but Dylan Anderson went to the same high school for 4 years. He didn't jump to one of the prep schools. So I think that is a different mentality where there is a kind of built-in patience in the European system that is, and certainly, we've seen guys, and, you could actually, I've seen, if a guy does go pro at 17, he can get traded to another team or whatever. But for the most part, you come up fairly slowly through not only the pro team that has the amateur club, amateur air quotes, but also through the international system. You look at Larson and Kriisa and Ballo, all these guys have all played for their national teams, whether it's their U17, U18, or, I think Larson who was playing with the regular national team over the summer, maybe even Kriisa as well. So there's just a patience as you have to pay your dues up the chain that you don't necessarily see, because if you're really good, Well, some high school is going to start you as a freshman.
Right. Let's look ahead to Tennessee here in a second, because there's a lot that I think is fascinating about Tennessee. But have I told you about the DraftKings Sportsbook app, code word PHNX?
Yeah, but you can't talk about it enough.
All right. It's a great point. Here's the deal. So you put down $5, a measly $5 on an NBA game, just not 4, 5. You put down $5 on an NBA game, and if that team wins money line, you can get up to $200 in free plays. Now, last year, John Schuster, and I signed off on this, advised all of you to bet against the Pistons, which promptly forced the Pistons to basically become the best team in the NBA. I'm trying this now. Bet on the Suns when they're playing bad teams. Check that one out. But again, 21 and up, Arizona only. Got a gambling problem, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. But again, the DraftKings Sportsbook app, code word PHNX. Check out the show notes and the links in the description. Bet on the Suns, though, against bad teams. So check that one out. All right, Tennessee to me, guys, is fascinating because Tennessee to me encapsulates a lot of what you worry about with Arizona. And you saw that last year when Arizona went into Knoxville. Physical pressure, they get up in you. That's kind of what you saw against Houston last year in the tournament, TCU as well. I think this game's at McKale, but I think this is going to be a fun game to see where Arizona really is, against that style of play, fellas.
Yeah, completely agree. And it's a great one to have on the schedule as a result. We're all worried about this almost like Southern-ish group of basketball teams. The Alabamas, the Arkansas, the Houstons, the Tennessees, that group that has a bunch of physical wings, a good backcourt, athleticism, and wants to beat you up throughout the course of the game, talks a little bit in the process, and it's a legitimate team with a style that we all think can be problematic for Arizona. So it's the type of test that is really beneficial, I think, for the U of A at this early point. And we get to find out maybe if some of the additions they've included on this team, a guy like Ramey is a benefit. If Arizona's veteran backcourt elements, Kriisa, Larson, etc., are guys who can answer that and know what to expect perhaps a little bit better than they did in matchups last year. Because like in most games, Arizona's going to have an advantage on the inside. But, the pressure on the perimeter is probably going to be problematic. And if we've been concerned about Arizona's turnover circumstances, and I think, we certainly have been, it's higher than we'd like. Tennessee is the type of team that can be a problem in that regard. And if they force a turnover, they're going to score. And that's going to, create some momentum issues here and there. It's also an interesting game, I think, for Tubelis, who is a guy who got criticized a lot late in the year for being pushed off the block against more physical teams. From the get-go, Tennessee's going to try to do exactly that. And we'll get to see how well Tubelis, who has been excellent for Arizona this year and looks more advanced than he did last year. Looks like his offseason has certainly paid dividends. This is one of those matchups where we get to see whether he's made necessary steps to make Arizona more of a formidable opponent against this type of competition.
William?
One thing that I find very intriguing is looking at Tennessee this season. They've played 3 close games. Other than that, they've drilled everyone, and that includes Kansas, who they beat by 14. Now, I don't know if that was a late pull away, but 2 of those 3 teams they struggled with, Colorado and USC, so Pac-12 teams. And at least in USC's case, a Pac-12 team that's not completely dissimilar from Arizona, a little bit up-tempo, kind of athletic. Now, they ended up beating USC in overtime, but, took them to overtime. And then Colorado, who is one of the most bizarre teams in America, if you look at their early season schedule, handled them fairly well. But, Maryland's the other one who played with them. But other than that, they're beating some of these small conference teams by 40, 50 points. And, defensively, and again, it's way early. They haven't played enough good teams, but they're like on record-setting pace for like defensive, different analytics. So again, I think it's one of those clash of styles in the fact that you've got an elite offense versus an elite defense. Now, talent-wise, they're both pretty athletic. They're a little more physical. Arizona's probably more athletic. Arizona's a little bit bigger, but not much. So I think it's going to be a fascinating game. And what do they say? Styles make matches, or styles make fights, and that's going to be the case with this one.
Yep. All right, everybody out there, really thank you. Awesome contributions from all of you. 8:30 tip on Saturday, so probably about a 10:30 post game. It's going to be a lot of fun. Everybody out there, though, you're the ones that make the show. Thanks for all your remarks. Brad, Shu, as always, really appreciate both of you. Jacob Franklin, we're going to let him sign off. Just to let you know, Jacob Franklin is working on his master's. He's decided that he didn't like his ASU undergrad, so he's working on an Arizona master's, which we will 100% give him a lot of credit for there. Jacob, you're doing good work right there. Nobody can see Jacob, so you're going to have to take my word for it. All right, everybody out there, again, thank you a ton. Again, means the world to me. For John Schuster, Brad Alice, the aspiring U of A grad Jacob Franklin, I am Mike Luke. You have been listening to the AZ Wildcats postgame.